This exercise we're about to start is a little bit harder, and it's kind of a continuation of what we were doing yesterday with the shading. So now we're going to be tracing a circle, and I want you to trace the outer edge of a roll of tape. So I'll be leaving a roll of tape at each spot. Notice how I put it in the middle and kind of to the left. Now when you trace it, you want to make sure that you are using a light stroke and a broken line. So there are literally gaps of about an inch in places. The reason why is because if you have a hard outline and it's solid and all the way around, it's going to flatten your form. Now, up on the screen, it probably looks like there's nothing there. That's intentional. It's because you want to draw as light as possible. So I was using the lightest pencil, which is an HB if you are using the pencil set. If you don't have a pencil set and you want to use a 2B wooden pencil, you can. You should not be using a mechanical pencil at all, though, at this point. And the reason why is because a mechanical pencil is a softer lead. It's probably more like a 4B or even a 6B. It's also a sharper, skinnier point. So you're going to be pressing deeper into the paper, which is something I don't want you to do, not right now. So all you're focusing on is getting the outline of the shape and the cast shadow. Now the cast shadow on a sphere will look exactly like an oval. So you want to think of it round. In fact, I want you to envision the sphere gone, but the shadow is still there. And if you were to remove the sphere but keep the shadow, it should look like a pretty perfect oval. Now there is something called a penumbra. That's where the form shadow meets the midtone. So that's what I'm drawing in there. It's going to look kind of like a moon that's not full. It's got like kind of a crescent shape in the shadow. When you are doing this, you are thinking only in terms of hatching and cross hatching. And it's not that it's done sloppily. So I want you to understand you actually slow down. It looks like I'm working fast because it's all sped up. And that's as a courtesy so that you're not just sitting there watching me draw for hours. Because literally this took me like 45 minutes to do. I actually want you to slow down and think about hatching and cross hatching and how can you build up those hatches to get a darker value. In terms of what pencil to use when, I always start off with a lighter pencil than I think I'm going to need because it's always easier to go darker than it is to erase when we're talking about pencil. So I go to the value, I'll take something like a 2B or an HB at first, and then later I'll go to something darker like a 4B or a 6B. You always want to compare values on a sphere. Now, there are some rules you can follow. You always want to ask yourself, first of all, which one's darker? Is it the cast shadow that's darker or the form shadow? And it kind of depends on the value of the sphere. So there's a local value. Is it a light colored sphere, like light gray, or is it like dark, like an 8-ball would be? So you always have to compare, look at your reference photo. In this case, you should have a darker cast shadow than you should a form shadow. Form shadows are always a gradual shift from darkness into light. So that's one of those rules that you have to memorize too. So you start off something like this, where you're wrapping your stroke kind of in a short stroke all around that form, just with using hatch marks. And you're thinking, I should make that cast shadow darker. The form shadow does need to be dark, but that's not as dark as a cast shadow. And you kind of come up with a priority of which value goes where. So cast shadow is darkest, then the form shadow, then midtone, then light side, and finally your highlights. Really think about wrapping that stroke around the form. So at the top there where the highlight is, it's almost like a hexagon, similar to a stop sign. You can use a number of different strokes here. And I'm zooming in so you can see kind of the texture that's happening here, but it's really just to create shading. If you go too dark, that's okay. You can erase and redraw. If you have a white eraser, you can kind of stamp down and lift off. A kneaded eraser really is the proper tool. So if you have one of those, you can use them. I have a couple on hand if you wanted to lift off some material. The thing is, you don't want to give up too soon, nor do you want to go too messy. There is like kind of a rhythm to this. It's not just completely erratic. It does have to curve and wrap around that ball, just like a basket weave, only it's like woven into the shape or form of this sphere. Again, your form shadow does need to drift lightly up into the mid-tone. It's a smooth transition. It really fades. There is a little bit of reflected light that's bouncing from the ground and it's beaming right into the form shadow. That's normal on an object that has a little bit of a shine to it. The shinier the object, the more obvious the reflected light's going to be. So you always have to pay attention to those values. Your reflected light should not be as light as a mid-tone. That's one of those rules that you'll need to memorize at some point. So for the background, I kind of lightly shaded. When you're shading with a pencil, you don't want to use the full-on side of it. You use an angled point to do that. Try and curve your strokes to kind of wrap and arc around the sphere. It'll create an interesting kind of pattern while also creating value. Take the time to really look at that reference photo. Make sure you're following all of those small, subtle value shifts, and then spend time also fine-tuning towards the end of the drawing process. Look for any line or value you missed. The sphere is one of those basic forms that we see all the time in the real world. A lot of the objects around us can be considered a sphere or a sphere hybrid. We're going to be taking that sphere and drawing an apple. In fact, you can see me starting that outline process. You're going a little bit smaller than the first drawing that we did of the sphere. And this time you're trying not to make it a perfect circle, because apples aren't always going to be a perfect circular shape. They're going to have some bumps or angles to it. And you actually want to treat it or approach it more like kind of geometric and look for weird angles or edges. Just like with the sphere, you don't want to go dark with the outline, and you want to kind of think of it more sketchy and a little bit rough. Mine is done with what's called multiple hatch lines. You know of hatch, but this is where you draw and you're not doing a continuous line. You're kind of roughly sketching it in, and you're looking for major shapes. So that might be the stem, that might be the cast shadow, that might be the indent at the top near the stem where it goes in there. So you want to draw all of those shapes, even the penumbra, which is the dividing line between mid-tone and your form shadow on that apple. Just like with the sphere, you want to start to shade in the shadow stuff first. So I'm going to form shadows, I'm going to the little cast shadow that's near that stem, and then I'm going to the cast shadow that's also just below the apple on the ground plane. And remember, only crosshatch. We're not blending here. We're not trying to shade per se. I mean, we are shading by layering our strokes, but we're not outright going back and forth with that pencil to shade. We're using crosshatch really, and keep that in mind. Wrapping your stroke around the form, thinking of contour line, cross contour as well. The nice thing about the apple is it's not a perfect shaped fruit. It's got some indents and bumps. It's kind of like a potato. You think it's going to be perfect, but then it has all these interesting organic things happening to it. So take your time, build up the layers, start off with the HB, the 2B, and then you can switch to the 4B, the 6B, 8B you can use maybe in the cast shadows, and you want to build up the background. You're really trying to articulate that form, the curve, the mass of it with your stroke. So this is a extra challenge, and for some of you this is going to be really interesting. For others it's going to be a challenge, but just know I'm here to help you if you need it.